Hey, today I'm going to talk about some authors that I've read from who are pretty well known, but I'm going to talk about some of their lesser read works today that I recommend and I think are just as good or if not better than some of their more renowned or well-known books. This is not to say that an author's most popular book isn't always their best or isn't worth reading, which I think for most everyone on this list, I would agree that it is well worth reading the book that they're known for. It's also to say though that I think there is something very valuable about reading deeper into an author's backlog or just reading more in depth throughout their entire, body of work rather than just saying, oh, great, I read their most read book and I can say that I've read from this author now. I think that there is so many amazing books that are just a bit overlooked in ways, even though they are by some of these very famous or well-known authors who've been awarded, literary prizes, and they have books that have been read by millions of people, but then they also have these kind of neglected or overlooked works. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I did use Goodreads and the number of ratings each book has to give me an indication of how well read this book was by the author's audience in comparison to their other books, essentially. So that's kind of the metric I used. It's definitely imperfect, but I do think it is a good enough indicator of this being someone's most popular work versus this other book that's read way less than that popular book. I'm going to start with Jesmyn Ward, who has won a National Book Award, and some of her famous books are Sing Unburied Sing, Salvage the Bones, Let Us Descend. All three of these books have gotten more attention than her memoir, Men We Reaped. And Men We Reaped I found absolutely amazing. This is a memoir of the author's growing up in this rural Mississippi kind of close-knit community where poverty is something that's experienced by everyone around her. And this book specifically talks about the death of 5 people extremely close to her, whether they are friends within her community. One is even, sadly, her brother. They are all Black men. And she talks about each of their lives and subsequent deaths. And she builds this picture of this community that is so tender and just taken so carefully. Obviously, this is something deeply personal to her, and super tragic to have lost so many people close to her. And this all happens in a very short time frame as well. I believe the 5 deaths occurred over 5 years. I think this happens oftentimes with authors who write both fiction and nonfiction, that oftentimes the nonfiction is overlooked a bit or just not as read or noticed, essentially. This isn't to say that these books on this list, including Men We Reaped, aren't beloved books. Most all of these books that I'm going to talk about are really well liked by the readers, but are just read less often than, say, a book that, in her case, won the National Book Award. Maya Angelou was a beloved poet, author, and speaker whose most famous work is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And I was so surprised when I looked up her body of works on Goodreads to see that I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings has been given over 500,000 ratings, and her second most read book, according to Goodreads, Letter to My Daughter, only had 34,000 ratings. So she's someone on this list where there is just a vast difference between her most read book and then her other books that she's written as well. I have read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and I've also read some of her other entries in her autobiography. So I have read Letter to My Daughter, and I have read Mom and Me and Mom. And I also have read her collected poems. And with Maya Angelou, I think anywhere else is an amazing place to go after reading I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. You should continue in her autobiography if you're fascinated with her life, and I mean, her childhood is just so compelling in that she really had to go through a lot of very difficult things, but from a very young age, she was so driven and passionate. Even as a child, it seems she knew exactly what she wanted. She had such a strong voice as a child, which of course carried through her adulthood and her life as a poet and an author. And that's something that you'll hear in all of her autobiographies and all of the work that I've read from her thus far, is that her voice is just so distinct, so strong and empowered. Her work is really inspiring to me, and I just find her such a lovely person as well. I do think I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is a wonderful place to start with her, but I do urge you not to stop there with her work. There's so much more to love and learn and enjoy in her work. Angela Y. Davis. I think many of us are familiar with her as a political activist, someone who is for the abolishment of the prison industrial complex, and throughout her life as being part of the Communist Party and affiliated with the Black Panthers, has been extremely outspoken in her views. Her most read work is Women, Race, and Class, which I think is a fabulous foundational text of intersectionality between those three things: women, race, and class. The book, though, that I'm going to recommend today from her is actually her autobiography. So this is her story of her life, and most specifically the story of her activism. What I found so interesting and amazing about her autobiography were her stories of spending time in Cuba, working with these other leaders, people in the Black Panther Party, people in the Communist Party, in this time where she was literally like on the run for her involvement with these political parties. I found her autobiography very inspiring, and I would love to see another follow-up to that, as Angela Y. Davis is still alive. She wrote this autobiography when she was quite young, and I mean that's really because she had lived such a life already, and had so much to say already. It is quite long. I think it's almost 500 pages. I also recommend listening to the audiobook of this because it is narrated by Angela Davis herself. Fredrik Backman is probably the most well-known author on this list of present day, and his book, A Man Called Uwe, is extremely popular. I still know so many people are reading it today and will be continuing to read that, along with other books. His Beartown series is quite popular as well. But I'm going to recommend reading Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer, which is a novella by him. This is a short work of fiction talking about an elderly man and his family, and they are dealing with his dementia and memory loss as he's aging, and he's having a harder time recalling events and people, and it's very heartbreaking. I feel like when I was reading this book, I had an understanding that the author may have experienced this kind of grief in his own life, and it's this grief where you are grieving a person who is still living and you're still interacting with, but they are no longer the same person in some ways, and they're losing their sense of self as well with this constant memory loss. I think nearly everyone would be emotionally moved by reading this little novella. I have also read A Man Called Uwe, which I read after reading this short story, and I didn't really enjoy it, which is definitely an unpopular opinion. I do think that for me, Backman's books are a little too cheesy and like Hallmark movie-esque in a way that isn't my style, but I think works for so many people. These are very like feel-good books that are also pulling at your emotional heartstrings at the same time. For me, I don't think I'll be reading any more Fredrik Backman, but who knows. He had one novella that totally worked for me and I think was amazing, and then another novel-length book that just wasn't for me. N.K. Jemisin is a name that if you read fantasy and sci-fi, you are well aware of who this amazing author is. The Broken Earth trilogy is renowned for being an amazing trilogy of books that is just banger after banger after banger, and she truly did hit the mark on every single one of those books, I believe. I have read that trilogy, But today I'm going to recommend actually her least read series, and that is the Dreamblood duology. This is her first fantasy work, and I think is telling in some ways. It's not as perfected and fine-tuned as her later work, but I still thought this duology was amazing. Jemisin goes hard on the world building in this duology, which I think she does in her other works as well, and it's something that I'm a fan of. I don't mind being tossed in without knowing what's going on, seeing new words that, they're entirely made up words. So you have a glossary in the back, you're referencing these different time periods, you have this amazing map in the front of the book that you're also flipping back to as your characters are moving throughout this world. That's something that I love with my fantasy personally. In this world, you have gatherers who are tasked with gathering dream blood from dreamers, and this is a special kind of magic that only certain people can do, and then they use this in a way to execute justice, because that process of harvesting dream blood does kill the person who is, for lack of better words, being harvested from. Of course, there are people who will take this for their own political gain and advantage, and they are not fulfilling that kind of duty of being keepers of justice and peace. It is a duology, so there's 2 books, and the first one is The Killing Moon. I don't recommend that you read this over the Broken Earth trilogy. I mean, there's no way. The Broken Earth trilogy is just too dang good, but if you like Jemisin, or if you like complex world building, I do think the Dreamblood duology is well worth your time. James Baldwin is someone that I have a few different things to say about, as he was an avid writer of fiction and nonfiction, both beloved by readers and will continue to be beloved and seen as classics in literature for years and years and years to come. He's one of my favorite authors. But overall, with Baldwin, I think we could all use a bit more of his nonfiction. Right now, and for the past almost year, I have been reading through the collected works of James Baldwin's nonfiction. It's collected into this huge book called The Price of the Ticket, and every single essay has been amazing, actually. We have essays, of course, about race, things that are similar to works that I've already read, so Notes of a Native Son. You have works of literary criticism, where he's talking about other authors in their works that he has read and is critical of, or is admiring in different ways and influenced him. You have him on politics. You have him on all these different socio-cultural issues that are so interesting, and all of his insights are extremely relevant to today. There's just so much to learn from him and his insights, and to be thinking about when we are approaching the issues of today. And for his fiction, I would say we need to read more of his lesser read books. Of Baldwin's fiction, I've read Giovanni's Room, If Beale Street Could Talk, and Go Tell It on the Mountain. Of the 3 of those, Go Tell It on the Mountain is his least popular, and I would put it above the other 2 in terms of books that made an impact on me. I thought Go Tell It on the Mountain was especially interesting, as Baldwin is a son of a pastor, and Go Tell It on the Mountain has a lot to do with church and the Bible, and it is autobiographical in some ways, as we are following a young boy whose father is a pastor, and he is questioning the church and his father's role in it, and the way that his father behaves, especially towards him. I am very eager to get to more of Baldwin's work. I am going to wrap up with the nonfiction collection at some point. It's huge, so it's taken forever. But once I wrap that up, I will return back to his fiction, and I'm excited to pick up where I left off and just continue to read through his works. A book that I read really recently that I'm excited to talk about is Memorial Days by Geraldine Brooks. Geraldine Brooks is a well-known author. I believe she's won the Pulitzer Prize for her book March. I am speaking on this book quite a bit prematurely, as it just came out, so it hasn't had the longevity of many of these other books have had to gain their traction and popularity, but I doubt that Memorial Days will be as read as some of her more popular books, for the simple fact that it is nonfiction compared to her fiction. So Memorial Days is her memoir about the death of her husband, Toni Horowitz. So this happened in 2019, and it was an unexpected death. And she is talking about the grieving process for her. This is done in dual timelines, where on one hand, we are following the immediate aftermath of her husband's death from the moment that she is informed that your husband has died, to then the other timeline being 3 years later, where she takes the time to go to a remote island off the coast of Australia, which is the country where she's from, and she spends time alone in isolation to then write this book, Memorial Days, about the passing of her husband. I've read a lot of memoirs. It's a genre of book that I just continuously gravitate towards, and I've read a lot of memoirs about people losing their loved ones, whether it be a partner or a child. And this is a really, really good one. You feel in a way like overcome with her love for her husband in the way that she memorializes him and their relationship, which was such a tight partnership, as they were both authors, they were both reporters, they were both parents of their children, and throughout their relationship they maintained this very, very close bond, both in like their domestic life in the home, but also their professional life as well. This was the first book I ever read from Geraldine Brooks, and after reading this, I would love to read Horse, which is the book that she was writing when Toni passed away. She speaks about writing Horse in this memoir because it was the book that she was working on at the time of her husband's passing, and it was a book that she was not confident in, that Toni continuously had pushed her and believed in her. And if you look today, Horse is the most read book of hers on Goodreads, and I think that goes to show that, you know, what he saw in her and saw in that book is resonating with readers. So I'm eager to read Horse as a first exploration into her fiction. This book, Memorial Days, I would also recommend the audiobook, as it's read by Geraldine Brooks herself. Philip K. Dick is a famous sci-fi author who's famous for his work Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which has been adapted into the movie Blade Runner, The Man in the High Castle, which was adapted into a TV show, and the short story that I'm going to talk about today, which is titled We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, which was adapted into Total Recall. Now, I haven't watched Total Recall, but if you have watched Total Recall, or if you have not, I recommend this short story. We are set on a futuristic Earth where there has been exploration to Mars, and there is kind of like alien invasion or just like conflict with aliens in the outer space areas. And you have a character who is just obsessed with the idea of wanting to go on a Mars expedition and to be a secret agent and to be a hero in this conflict. And we are living in a time where you can have your memories altered. And he wants this dream to feel so realized for himself that he then goes to have those memories implanted into his brain of actually living out that dream. The twist is when he goes to whatever weird sort of lab is able to manipulate your memories in that way, they realize that it is not a false memory that he is seeking. This is actually a real memory that already exists within him. He has actually lived out that dream. And you then have the question of, well, what is there to do now? This is a book that talks about memory, the manipulation of memory, and is just a very good time and quite fun, and extremely short. So this is something you can get in an easy afternoon of reading. I do think that Philip K. Dick's other works are amazing. I've read a few of them, including his most famous two, Man in the High Castle and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Both well worth reading, but I would say don't pass up this short story. The last author I'm going to talk about is Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison is an author who I often hear from many people they want to read all of her work, which is amazing. Beloved is her book that is most read, followed by The Bluest Eye, both of which I've read and enjoyed, and I do think are essential reading. But what I want to talk about today is the book Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. I don't think this is the correct entry point to Toni Morrison, but if you have already read one or maybe two of her works, you absolutely should get to Song of Solomon. This has one of the most compelling main characters I've ever read. His name is Milkman Dead, which is a fabulous name, first of all. And Milkman is on the search for his family's history. He wants to understand where he came from, who his family is, and he is really just like soul searching within this book. This book is full of flawed characters, like every which way, who feel so real. And this is the first book of Morrison's that I read where the main character was a man. I was totally impressed by the fact that Toni Morrison can equally write an amazing female main character just as well as she can write an amazing male main character. She's a master of character work, and this book, I think, is her best example of that I've read thus far. Those are my underread books by some very well-known authors that I recommend to you. Let me know if you have any recommendations for me, and if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them. Bye-bye.